Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into something incredibly profound. We're looking at love, loss, and the human spirit through a really unique lens. The story of Abraham Lincoln, his beloved son Willie, and a cemetery packed with spirits who literally refuse to leave. Let's settle in and figure out what it actually means to let go.
So let's start off with a question that might just stop you in your tracks. What if holding on is actually refusing to live? We so often think that holding on tightly to someone we've lost is like the ultimate proof of our love, right? We grip onto the memories, the sadness, all those what ifs. But today, we're going to totally challenge that idea. We're going to explore that razor-thin line between a beautiful memory and an invisible prison, and see how the illusion of control can actually prevent us from honoring the very people we miss.
The acclaimed author George Saunders poses this really monumental what if. He asks, what if Abraham Lincoln could speak to Willie one last time? And in his phenomenal novel, Lincoln in the Bardo, we get way more than just a standard ghost story. We're thrown into this deeply universal imagined conversation where the living and the dead are literally existing side by side. And they aren't just separated by death, they're separated by this shared inability to just say goodbye.
Part 1. The nighttime stopped. Okay, so picture this contrast. On one side, you have Washington, D.C. in February 1862. It is completely consumed by the Civil War. Telegraphs are constantly clicking, generals are arguing, and the fate of the entire nation is quite literally hanging in the balance. But then, inside the cemetery, the world is completely frozen. It's totally silent. The President of the United States has actually slipped away from his guards and his titles. In this moment, he's not the commander-in-chief. He is just a shattered father whose personal universe has come to a screeching, devastating halt.
There's this thought from Lincoln.
Part 2. Why the dead stay.
So in this space, the Bardo, you've got these characters who fiercely rationalize why they're still there. You have Hans Vollman, who insists he's just recovering in a sick box, not a coffin, a sick box. Then there's Roger Bevins III, who's totally clinging to his unfinished plans. And little Willie genuinely believes his dad is coming back to take him home. But as Reverend Thomas wisely points out, they're all really just terrified of the truth. At first, denial acts as this merciful shield against the pain. But man, that shield very quickly turns into a prison. Hans Vollman eventually has this breathtaking realization. He says, the greatest tragedy isn't dying, it's discovering too late how beautiful life already was. Think about that. When we're alive, we just rush right past the ordinary miracles, don't we? The warmth of the sun on your face, a shared laugh, the smell of rain. We just assume they're always going to be there. But the spirits in the Bardo realize that those ordinary, mundane days were actually absolute treasures. And it's that painful clarity that makes them cling even tighter to the world they lost.
Part 3. Love or a prison? This brings us to a huge question. Can love itself become the exact thing that keeps us from moving forward? Take young Willie, for example. He's trapped in this cemetery because of a really tragic misunderstanding. He truly believes that if he moves on, he's abandoning his dad. He thinks that waiting there is the ultimate act of loyalty. It's a perfect example of how deeply intertwined love and fear can get, to the point where staying stuck feels like the absolute only way to prove you still care. Reverend Thomas observes a pretty brutal truth here. He says, love that asks another person to remain trapped ceases to be pure love. It becomes fear wearing love's clothing. That's a phenomenal way to put it, isn't it? Fear wearing love's clothing. If the other spirits are egging Willie on to stay, are they doing it for him or just to avoid facing their own fears? Because true, pure love absolutely has to seek the ultimate good of the other person, even if that means having to let them go.
Part 4. Private grief, public burden.
Now, as the casualties of the Civil War were rising to these staggering, almost incomprehensible numbers, Lincoln initially processed them conceptually, exactly like a president should, thinking in terms of troops, strategic losses, map positions. Intellectually, yes, he knew men were dying. But there's a massive, massive gulf between knowing something in your head and feeling it in your gut. The sheer scale of the war was essentially an abstract horror to him at first. But then, tragedy strikes his own home. And literally everything shifts. Lincoln realized one dead soldier was no longer one less man in a regiment. He was an empty chair. Losing Willie entirely destroyed that illusion of distance. Suddenly, every single name on a casualty report wasn't just a number on a page anymore. It was a mother waiting for footsteps she was never going to hear again. Every statistic became a shattered family. And in this incredibly tragic way, his own immense personal sorrow exponentially deepened his compassion for the suffering of the whole country. So how does a leader keep going through that? Well, duty is not the absence of grief. It is choosing to act while grief remains beside you. Lincoln couldn't just hit pause on history to mourn his son. The war was still raging. True courage for him wasn't about feeling strong or somehow untouched by it all. It was about having to make these necessary, world-altering decisions while carrying a completely unbearable weight.
Part 5, Love's Final Act of Courage. For the spirits to finally leave, and honestly for Lincoln to survive this, 3 distinct things have to happen. Number 1, permission. They have to stop waiting and actually open their hands. Number 2, memory without possession. It's that realization that you don't have to cling to a person to honor how beautiful they were. And number 3, trusting that love remains, even when physical presence is gone. It's an absolute massive evolution of the heart. Willie finally gets this beautiful realization. He says, I do not need you to be sad every day. I would rather be with you when you laugh. He gets it. He understands that his dad being happy doesn't erase him. He doesn't need his father anchored to a tomb just to prove he's remembered. By letting his father actually live and laugh again, Willie's own spirit is finally freed. And Lincoln reaches his own massive breakthrough, saying, you may go without leaving my heart. Grief can sometimes morph into this false form of loyalty, tricking us into thinking that sorrow is the only real proof that our love existed. But Lincoln learns to release his son's spirit. And by doing that, he transforms his grief into this vastly expanded capacity to love a broken, bleeding nation. As the Lincolns find this peace, it's like a domino effect. The other spirits wake up too. Hans Vollman realizes love can remain, even when the beloved does not. It makes so much sense, right? Memory hurts because of the absence, for sure, but it heals by acting as absolute proof that a powerful presence was once there. They realize they don't need to haunt a cemetery to prove that their lives actually mattered. So, what's our ultimate takeaway from all this? It's that we do not honor love by refusing to continue. We honor it by allowing what we receive to keep living through us. Letting go isn't forgetting. It certainly isn't minimizing the loss. Letting go is the profound maturation of love. It's taking the gifts that person gave us, packing them up, and carrying their light forward into the rest of our own lives. So I'll leave you with this to think about. Are you holding on to someone, or maybe even something? Not because they need you to, but simply because you fear who you'd be without them? Sometimes the hardest but most necessary path toward peace begins with just opening our hands, while making sure we keep our hearts open. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Until next time, keep learning and keep growing.